My name is Patsy Bryson. I'm Chair of the Town of Hilton Head Island Board of Zoning Appeals, and I call to order the February 28, 2022 meeting of the Town of Hilton Head Island Board of Zoning Appeals at 2:30 p.m. Ms. Haley, will you please call our roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Christian?
Present.
Mr. Walzak?
Present.
Ms. Loudermilk?
Present.
Dr. Ponder?
Dr. Ponder, maybe the video seems to be frozen.
Okay, we can give her a moment and circle back. Mr. Johnson?
Present.
Mr. Fingerhut?
Present.
Dr. Ponder?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Bryson?
Present.
Thank you.
So I understand we have a quorum, Ms. Haley?
Yes, ma'am, we do.
Thank you, ma'am. At this time, I'll ask Ms. Haley if we are in compliance with the Freedom of Information Act of the state of South Carolina, also known as FOIA.
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Thank you, ma'am. I think I skipped over that and I went straight to roll call, but anyhow, we're good now.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to welcome all board members, staff. I see that we have Councilmember Stanford, Councilmember Lennox, present at our meeting. I apologize if I missed any council members, and also the town attorney Curtis Coltrane, and others members of the public that I may not have mentioned. So welcome to our meeting. I'm going to outline our procedures for today. Since we are virtual, public comments will be taken pursuant to the instructions given for a virtual meeting. There's no podium for you to come to stand at and no sign-up sheet, but there were sign-up procedures, which Ms. Haley will explain when we get to public comment. Today, we had two variances on our agenda. One of the variances has been withdrawn. That item appears under our published agenda as 9B, B as in boy. It is variance 002853-2021. It was a request from John Nicholas Craigo for a variance from LMO section 16-4-102B7C for use specific conditions for principal uses being screening outside storage of bicycles in light commercial district. And the location was 13 Executive Park Road, and that has been withdrawn. So that will not be being considered today. We still do have one other variance to consider. And the rules that we will follow, the procedure that we will follow is as follows. First of all, as a quasi-judicial board, it is important that we provide for fair and impartial hearing for applicants and the staff members and any members of the public who speak at our public hearings. In so doing, we follow both procedural and substantive due process. The procedural parts are found in the requirements of the town's land management ordinance, or LMO, and in the BZA rules of procedure. Specifically, those procedural requirements are set forth in Article 7, Roman numeral 7 of the rules of procedure for the Board of Zoning Appeals. The standards for variances are found, that's the substantive part, are found in section 16-2-103S of the town's LMO. And specifically, the procedure that we will follow for variances as found in the rules of procedure, Article 7 of the Board of Zoning Appeals rules of procedure, is first of all, there's a presentation by town staff who has a maximum of 20 minutes to present the facts and applicable legal principles that the staff believes support the position of staff with respect to the application for a variance. During the presentation by staff, members of the Board of Zoning Appeals may ask such questions as they deem appropriate. At the discretion of the chair, staff's time may be extended if the staff is unable to complete the presentation due to questioning from the Board of Zoning Appeals. A similar matter, the applicant has a maximum of 20 minutes to present the facts and applicable legal principles that the applicant believes supports the application for a variance. During the presentation by the applicant, members of the Board of Zoning Appeals may ask such questions as they deem appropriate. At the discretion of the chair, the applicant's time may be extended if the applicant is unable to complete the presentation due to questioning from the Board of Appeals. Following that, there's a 5-minute time for rebuttal by either side. Following the presentation, the board may ask such additional questions of the applicant or staff as the members deem appropriate. And then if there's public comment will be taken. After that, the chair will incorporate all of the evidence presented into the record, and the chair will then call for a motion and a vote by the Board of Zoning Appeals. After that, a notice of action is sent to the applicant. That's a procedure that we follow for variances, and that is what we will follow today. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda itself. The chair has noted the withdrawal of one of the items on the agenda. Is there a motion, or sorry, are there any other changes by staff to the agenda?
Move acceptance as amended, Madam Chair.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Second by Ms. Loudermilk and a motion by Mr. Christian. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, the chair will ask our secretary, Ms. Haley, to call the roll on the motion.
Certainly. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of our January 24, 22 meeting. And before calling for a motion, I would ask if the chair has a couple of quick suggestions for the minutes. Are there any other requested revisions by board members to the minutes? Hearing none, the chair suggests that the minutes include where there were 2 items being postponed, that the minutes reflect that they were postponed to February pursuant to the authority of the chair as found in Article 11, Section 4 of the Rules of Procedure, so that it's clear how those matters were postponed and to what date. Is there any objection to including that in the minutes in those 2 locations where 2 different matters were postponed? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes as revised?
So moved.
Mr. Christian made the motion. Mr. Walzak, I saw you raise your hand. You can be the second.
Sure.
Any discussion on the motion? Ms. Haley, hearing none, will you please call the roll on the motion?
Certainly. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item on our agenda is appearance by citizens. Ms. Haley, do we have any citizens who have asked to appear other than during the variance hearing?
Madam Chair, besides the variance hearing, we do not have any public comment for phone participation. We do have 1 citizen signed up to speak during the variance application, and at the appropriate time, we can call on that person for their comments. Additionally, public comments were submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The portal closed at 1:30 today, and the comments of record were shared with the board. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And the chair acknowledges receipt of those comments from Ms. Haley. The next item is unfinished business. The chair is not aware of any. Any board members aware of any unfinished business? That moves us next to new business. And as I stated before, there will be a public hearing on a variance request. So I will now open the public hearing on variance request VAR-002732-2021, a request from Nathan, I don't know, is it Steury or Stour? of Cranston Engineering Group, PC, on behalf of Beaufort County for a variance from LMO Section 16-5-103D, as in David, adjacent street buffer, for relief from the adjacent street buffer adjacent to the access easement. Also, Section 105J7C, gates, for relief from the requirement that gates be located at least 100 feet from any arterial or collector street. And finally, LMO Section 16-5-107D, as in David, 10, use of parking spaces as electric vehicles charging station, for relief from the electric vehicle charging station requirement, which is required for all multifamily and non-residential development. The property is known as Ford's Shell Ring and is located at 273 Squire Pope Road and has a parcel number of R511 000 0222 O. That's a mouthful. At this time, I will call on the staff for their presentation, and for the staff and the applicant, Ms. Haley, once again, will be our kind and gentle timekeeper. And understand, Ms. Lewick, that you will be making the presentation on behalf of the staff. You may proceed.
Thank you. My name is Missy Lewick, Senior Planner for the record. I am going to share my screen. If I can find it, 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am, the chair can see it. Any board members not able to see that screen? Thank you, may proceed.
Okay. As Chair Bryson already explained, the variance number and the site is 273 Squire Pope Road. The request is from Nathan Sturry of Cranston Engineering on behalf of Beaufort County. The applicant is seeking a variance from 3 sections within the LMO, and those sections are 16.5.103D, adjacent street buffer standards, section 16.5.105J7C, gates, section 16.5.107D10, use of parking spaces as electric vehicle charging stations. This property is also zoned PR Parks and Recreation District and is located within the Corridor Overlay District. The subject property is located here, outlined in blue. It's on the north end of the island. It is adjacent to Tidal Marsh, and it's located on Squire Pope Road, which is a minor arterial road. Here's some of the project background. It's a 6.9 acre heavily wooded waterfront lot, and it was purchased by the town of Hilton Head Island in Beaufort County in 2003 for the purpose of protecting the 2 approximately 4,000-year-old shell rings resting there. The 2 rings form a figure 8. The smaller ring was constructed approximately 300 years earlier than the larger ring, which is partially superimposed over the older ring. And in March of 2021, Town Council approved entering into a joint ownership and operating agreement with the county for operation and maintenance of the site as a passive park. The county is responsible for the costs related to the planning and construction or repair of capital improvements on the property, and the town is responsible for the general maintenance, including mowing and clearing of the trail and opening and closing of the gate at the property. For our plan, This project was subject to public project review for consistency with the town's comprehensive plan, or our plan. And on April 7th of 2021, the Planning Commission found that this project, Ford Shellring Passive Park, PRR 000344-2021, was found to be consistent with the town's comprehensive plan for location, character, and extent. Here are some of the existing conditions again of the site. As you can see, it's heavily wooded. I visited the site on February 15, and I'll go through some of the images of the site. You can also see from these pictures, again, it is heavily wooded, and there are some views of the water in Skull Creek that are magnificent. This is, if you can look carefully, this is part of the shell ring. Here you can see the mound kind of in the center of the photo. And here you can see the shell ring where it's making a little bit of its curvature. So those are the existing site images. It's very overgrown, but I was able to find my way back there. Here is the site plan, and the proposed project scope includes access, parking improvements, compacted earthen trails, compacted earthen driveway, gates, fencing, and interpretive signage. The intent of the project is to construct the improvements utilizing minimal impact construction methodologies to limit excavation, clearing, and overall impact to lessen the effects to the natural features of the site. And the property is, of course, densely treed and benefits from an already large tree canopy. The property contains an access easement on the east side of the parcel, and that easement is in the process of being slightly relocated as part of this project. Here, so again, the applicant is requesting a variance from 3 sections within the LMO, and the first request is relief from the adjacent street buffer requirements. And the adjacent street buffer request would allow the parking spaces to encroach within the adjacent street buffer adjacent to the access easement. Access easements are considered other streets in the LMO, and while a setback is not required from an access easement for non-single family development, a type A buffer is, and the existing proposed parking spaces are within the adjacent street buffer. And so they would have to be relocated if this variance was not granted. The second request is seeking relief from section 16.5.105J7, gates. The LMO requires that gates be located at least 100 feet from any arterial or collector street. Again, Squire Pope Road is a minor arterial, and per the project site plan, the location of the gate is proposed to be 40 feet from the property line, and that is the minimum required stacking distance also per the LMO, so it does meet the minimum stacking distance requirement, but it does not meet the distance from an arterial or collector street, which is 100 feet. And the third request that's part of this variance is seeking relief from the electrical vehicle charging station requirements, section 16.5.107D10. The LMO requires an electrical vehicle charging station for all multifamily and non-residential developments, and a park use is considered to be non-residential development. Therefore, an EV charging station is required. And now I'm going to go through the 4 required variance criteria. Criteria number 1 is that there's extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to this particular piece of property. We found the subject property contains historic and archaeological significant shell rings, and the subject property contains tidal wetland on 3 sides and is densely vegetated with overstory and understory trees and shrubs. The subject property also contains an access easement, and the subject property is publicly owned and is planned for development as a passive park. Staff finds that this application does meet criteria 1 because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that pertain to this piece of property. The historic and archaeological significant shell rings, the tidal wetlands on 3 sides, the access easement, and dense vegetation are extraordinary and exceptional conditions. Variance criteria 2, these conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. Staff found that while there are other properties on Hilton Head Island that contain historic and archaeological significant shell rings, it is very rare. And while there are other properties in the vicinity located on tidal wetland, the subject property has tidal wetlands on 3 sides. Staff concludes that the application meets criteria 2 because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that apply to this piece of property that do not also generally apply to other properties within the vicinity. Criteria number 3, because of these conditions, the application of this ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. Staff finds the subject property is publicly owned and planned for development as a passive park. The adjacent street buffer requirement adjacent to an access easement where the parking spaces are proposed would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property by requiring a parking area offset from the access easement. It would require a larger development footprint than what is proposed. The site is currently densely vegetated, and the existing vegetation will remain largely undisturbed as a result of the proposed passive park development project per the project site plan. The gate requirement that requires the gate be placed at least 100 feet from an arterial or collector street would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, as it would also increase the development footprint and would result in increased disturbance of the site. The electric vehicle charging station requirement would unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, as it would require utilities be run to the site where none are proposed, which would also result in increased disturbance to the site. Staff finds that the application meets criteria 3 because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that apply to the subject property that would prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. Criteria number 4, the authorization of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good, and the character of the zoning district where the property is located will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. At the time the staff report was written, there were no letters of opposition. Excuse me. However, one letter of opposition was included within the public portal comments that were shared with you prior to the meeting today. The purpose and intent of the buffer standards is to spatially separate development from adjacent streets and adjacent development with aesthetically pleasing natural or landscaped buffers. Such buffers are intended to help mitigate potential adverse impacts from adjacent street traffic and create an attractive streetscape for motorists and allow the location of certain dissimilar land uses adjacent to one another by mitigating potential negative effects between uses, and provide space for landscaping that can help improve air and water quality and be used to reduce stormwater runoff. The proposed project is for development of a passive park, and the applicant's plan shows ample vegetation throughout the site. The purpose of the mobility, street, and pathway standards is to ensure the development accommodates the safe and efficient movement of motor vehicles, emergency vehicles, bicyclists, and pedestrians within the development and between the development and external transportation systems, neighboring development, and local destination points such as places of employment, schools, parks, and shopping areas. Such multimodal access and circulation is intended to provide transportation options, increase effectiveness of local service delivery, reduce emergency response times, and promote healthy walking and bicycling, contribute to the attractiveness of the development and the community, increase opportunities for interaction between neighbors, reduce vehicular miles of travel and travel times, and improve air quality to minimize congestion, traffic conflicts, and preserve the safety and capacity from community transportation systems. The applicant's plan shows proposed gates, planned mobility throughout the site, and proposed minimal parking improvements. The planned passive park use at the site reduces the need for the 100-foot setback from an arterial or collected street for a gated driveway or entrance. And the purpose of the parking and loading standards is to ensure the provision of parking and loading demand of the different uses allowed by the LMO. The standards in the parking section are intended to provide for adequate off-street parking and loading while allowing for the flexibility needed to accommodate alternative solutions. The standards are also intended to achieve town policies of supporting development and redevelopment and avoiding excessive paved surface areas. The applicant's plan shows minimal development. The EV charging station would require utilities be extended to the site and would require subgrade disturbance, which could impact trees and vegetation and possible unknown archaeological artifacts. Staff also finds the proposed park is planned to be of minimal disturbance to the adjacent tidal wetlands and historic and archaeologically significant shell rings, and the proposed park will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good, as it fits within the overall character of the zoning district. Staff finds that this application meets criteria 4 because the variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good. Staff concluded that the purpose and intent of the buffer standards are met, as the existing densely vegetated site will remain with the proposed passive park development. Also, the purpose and intent of the mobility street and pathway standards for the gate are met, as the safe and efficient movement of modes within the development, neighboring development, and external transportation systems has been planned for, including the gated access. And finally, the purpose and intent of the parking and loading standards are met, as the parking provided is proportionate to the proposed use. And finally, since staff finds that all 4 of the required criteria are met with this application, staff is recommending approval of this application. I wanted to add that Jamie Lapko, Senior Planner, is also on the meeting, and she's more familiar with some of the project background, joint ownership, and operating agreement for the town staff. And this concludes our presentation. We're both available to take comments at this time.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank Ms. Lofko for being available as well. At this time, we'll go through our usual rotational order for board questions, and we try to follow a different rotation so that different board members get to be first, middle, or last at different times. As board members know, if they want to pass, they can pass or have no comment or questions. So Ms. Loudermilk, your name comes up first this time for questions of staff.
Okay. Missy, I'm just trying to understand the adjacent street buffer, the relief from that LMO section, as well as the relief from the section regarding the gate setback. Are you inferring that the existing heavy vegetation provides sufficient shielding, if that's the right word, from view, that, you know, it's your position that those buffers and or setbacks are not needed, but is it based on the existing vegetation? I'm trying to follow the logic.
Sure. It's a little bit of both. The site overall has far more tree canopy than your typical development.
Mhm.
It is unusual that a drive aisle is also an access easement in a park like this, where if this was a drive aisle, then parking could be adjacent to it and there's no buffer required adjacent to a drive aisle. But because it's also an access easement, it is an other street and it requires a type A buffer on both sides. It does have a buffer on this side, if you can see my cursor. Where the parking is located, it will not meet the adjacent street buffer requirements because there will be parking within that buffer area. And the site overall more than exceeds the buffers that are required surrounding the site. It's only this on one side of the access easement, only where the new parking is proposed, where that parking is within the type A buffer.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Okay.
And then kind of related, but what's the, I don't want to say the difference, I understand the difference, but why is there a difference in the gate setback, if you will, the 100-foot requirement versus the 40-foot stacking distance requirement, which I understand this project does comply with? But again, what's the difference? I mean, why the difference?
Well, I may defer to Nicole on this one because I wasn't here when some of this language was created. I believe that the 100-foot from an arterial collector street requirement for a gate was for more active uses where you would have a lot of queuing traffic that would be pulling off of that arterial or collector street, and you would want to be able to accommodate that prior to entrance to your gate. And so that is where I think this logic comes from as far as the requirement for a gate to be 100 feet back. Now we do have stacking distance requirements from various things, one of them being a gate. And that doesn't relate to what, so if that was located on any other street that wasn't an arterial or collector street, then 40 feet is what we would require. In this instance, it happens to meet the stacking distance requirement, but not the 100 feet from an arterial collector street requirement. And I guess to expand on that further, just because of the type of use that's proposed, where usage isn't going to be that of, say, a gated community, if you will, that 100-foot stacking distance doesn't seem to be necessary.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Those were my questions.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, your name is up next in the list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, are there project corollaries here? I mean, have we done this, waived these regulations and requirements for similar projects in the past at all, or even lately?
I'm not aware of a project that's received relief from an EV charging station, nor the 100-foot from a gate requirement. But we have had relief requested from buffers before that this board has granted.
So the way that I read the materials, the charging station, for instance, the reason that they're asking to avoid the charging station is so that they don't have to basically tear up the terrain in order to install the electrical utilities that it would take to run said charging station. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So you're saying that there's no other sort of park project that didn't want to tear up the terrain enough, or that this is such a new requirement that this is one of the only times it's come up?
Well, this is a site that has not been developed. So the EV charging station requirements are for when you have basically new development, and it's if it was an existing site or existing building, then it would have to have had 50% of an increase to the square footage of the building for that to be retroactive. But in this case, it's a new development to a site, therefore it's required. We have a lot of existing parks where if an EV charging station wasn't developed when the park was developed, it could be considered a non-conforming site feature.
Okay, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is if we're setting a precedent, right, it seems, the reason why we want electric vehicle charging stations is at least in part to be in line with environmental goals for Beaufort County, for this region, right? And generally for the world. And if we waive that for the goal of not tearing up a piece of property, which ostensibly is also for environmental kind of reason, I'm trying to figure out which environmental reason am I supposed to be dealing with at which time, right? It seems like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul in or maybe we aren't. Maybe I'm reading it incorrectly. But if we are, I want to know why we are and why I should be interested in robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Missy, may I comment on that?
I'm sorry, I'm not identifying the speaker. Ms. Haley, can you help me out with who's wanting to speak?
Yes, Madam Chair, I believe it is Stephanie Nagy. Is that how you say your last name?
Is she a member of the staff? This is a staff presentation at this time, or is she a member of the public who wants to comment?
Ms. Bryson, she's part of the applicant team. She is representing Beaufort County.
Okay. Let's wait until the applicant time period is.
I think we need to wait for that one.
Yes.
Does staff have any comment on this? I'm going to ask the question again, Ms. Nagy. I'm going to ask it when it is Beaufort County's turn to speak. So
Sure.
I promise you I will ask the question again.
Sure.
No problem. Thank you.
But does staff have any comment on this?
Yes, Ms. Ponder. It's not necessarily that it's an environmental concern. This site is historically significant, and we have very few properties on the island that have this amount of significance, and that's the reason we don't want to disturb the dirt there, is because we want to preserve what is there.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
And that was Jamie Lopko. Am I saying it right, Jamie? Your last name? Thank you, ma'am. A member of the town staff who's working on this project. So, anything else, Dr. Ponder?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, questions from you of the staff, town staff? Mr. Johnson.
I have no questions at this time, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, your name is next in the list.
No, I got
yeah.
it. Thank you. Yeah, I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, you're up next.
A couple of questions. Any fencing, Missy, that's going to go along Squire Pope Road? Obviously, you know, it's just going to be somebody can pull over to the side of the road and walk in if they wanted to.
The fencing that's proposed is not in the area along Square Pope. There is a gate that will gate and open and close the park near the driveway. There is some other fencing over on the west side of the property that's proposed, I believe. But there's a little bit of a culvert. The only way that you're going to get in this site is from the access drive that's created.
Okay,
If any of
proposed hours of operation of the park?
I cannot speak to that.
It'll be similar to other parks. They'll be open dawn to dusk.
Okay, so only during daylight hours, Jamie?
Yes, sir.
Okay, are there no other electrified devices of any sort within the proposed park?
No, sir.
Okay, so it'll be dark at night. Someone from the town staff or the county staff will come by and lock it at the appropriate time and unlock it at the appropriate time in the morning.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you have one handicap parking space. It looks like they're all gravel pathways. Any concern there for handicap access or wheelchair access?
Not at this time, because of the historical significance of the property. We have a little bit of flexibility in that.
Okay. All right, those are my only questions for now.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Walczak, questions from you of the town staff?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Then that's down to the chair. Ms. Lewitt, can you put back up this screen that had the adjacent, the buffer and the easement area? Kind of going back to Ms. Loudermilk's question. I want to see if we can figure out, and if maybe you don't have that detail when the applicant speaks, I can ask a little bit more. Trying to figure out, is the access easement provided from Square Pope to an adjacent property owner? Is that an access easement, or is it access easement? I mean, surely it's not to just this site.
Right, yes, the access easement goes, I don't have, well, I guess I can go back to the overall site. The access easement goes all the way back to a parcel back here. And so that's where the access easement goes to, if you can see my cursor.
I can't see it at the time. Is it on the, just for the lack of, to the right side? Oh, now I see your
Okay.
cursor now. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry,
Okay, so the adjacent property to the right, so to speak, on the screen.
that's
Okay.
correct. Yep, so
Okay,
that's where the easement goes.
all right. And so the only reason that there's a buffer is because the road servicing this park is so close to the access easement. Is that correct?
The drive aisle is over the access easement, and therefore the parking, the associated parking is within the type A buffer on one side.
Okay.
Um,
Is the parking also within that easement area or outside the easement area?
It is outside the easement area.
Okay, and I think you mentioned that access easement is in the process of being relocated. Is that as part of creating this passive park? Do you know, or maybe Ms. Lopko knows?
Ms. Lapko can speak to the easement portion of this project.
The easement right now is currently only about 15 feet wide and is just to the right of the current access, closer to the marsh. And so we're shifting it a little away from the marsh and then widening it to the 24 feet to accommodate two-way traffic for the drive aisle. And then it will narrow back down to the 15 feet along the trail back to that landlocked property in the rear.
So will I guess you're calling it the drive aisle, are the drive aisle and the access easement coexistent for a certain distance?
Yes.
Okay,
From Squire Pope Road until the end of the parking, those two are one and the same.
okay, all right. So the drive aisle is not new construction, if you will, separate from the access easement. Okay, right. And back to the questions about the electric vehicle station. Are there electric utilities, I would guess, along Squire Pope Road? Are those underground? Remind me, I can't remember.
There are utilities that I can see on this survey. I don't recall if they're above ground or below.
So do we know technically whether or not you could service an EV station on this property with above ground electric wires as opposed to land disturbing service? Maybe I need to ask the engineer for the applicant that. Just wondering if there's another way to get that kind of service. Okay.
Well, I mean, we currently don't allow like solar as an accessory use in the PR district. So it couldn't be powered by solar.
But we don't know whether or not it could be. I'm not advocating for above ground utilities, but I'm just thinking of a different way that wouldn't be the same kind of land disturbing. And I guess another question is related to that, thinking about the amount of land disturbance, would it be possible to put the EV station where the handicap parking is so that not as much land is disturbed, and to move the handicap parking on the other side of, I guess it's the walkway around the sheltering? I'm just trying to find another way to do it. And if that's not a question appropriate for town staff, I'll be happy to maybe ask the applicant. I'll be happy to ask the applicant that question.
I think it would be better served to the applicant.
Okay, I just didn't know whether the staff had looked at other options, so, okay. All right. I think those are the questions I have. Any other board members have follow-up questions to any of that discussion? Hearing none, I guess we'll move on to the presentation by the applicant. And I don't know who's up, who wants to make the presentation by the applicant, but we'll call on the applicant at this point. And again, you have 20 minutes unless we constantly interrupt you with questions.
All right. Hey there, I'm Nathan Sturry, Cranston Engineering. Stephanie Najid will also be chiming in here. She's Beaufort County Passive Parks Manager.
Okay.
I think Missy and Jamie did a great job kind of explaining the intent of what we're trying to do here. So I don't think we need to kind of go through everything. I just wanted to speak to a couple points that I heard from the questions from some of the board members. In particular with the gates. Initially, we were discussing with the fire department what they would allow in terms of access. And the direction we got from them was just make sure that they can pull the fire truck off the road and they'll be fine. So we're going above and beyond that and providing it at the minimum 40 that Missy was discussing. And in order to get the 100 feet off of Squire Pope, that would have us have to shift all the parking back beyond that 100-foot point, and it would make our access drive aisle more than 150 feet wide, which would in turn kick up the requirement to put a hammerhead turnaround or do a lot more development in an area where we're really trying to keep the natural feel of the property and have zero impact where we can. So letting us have 40 feet off the road would really kind of satisfy everything that's been asked of us from the town planning department to date. And going back to the EV charging station, like Jamie said, we are not trying to disturb soil to the minimal extent possible. So right now, the only excavation that'll be going on the site will be for fence posts to put in the split rail fencing and for the gate posts. And I'm pretty sure that's it. So we're going to strip away two inches of topsoil in the parking area. And we're actually going to build the parking area and drive aisle above grade. So we minimize disturbance and potentially unearth some archaeological items that are there that will cause the need to have an archaeologist sit out there full time during construction at a pretty hefty price to the county or the town or whoever ends up paying for that. I'm going to let Stephanie speak to the easement and the adjacent street buffer stuff because she's dealing with the town directly on that. So Missy, if you want to chime in. Or Stephanie, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Nathan. Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Nadgett. I'm the Passive Parks Manager for Beaufort County. The town and the county, as Missy mentioned, co-own this piece of property. It is a joint project. We are currently in the process of obtaining approval for the joint ownership agreement negotiated document, as well as the easement document. This property came to the town and county with a easement from some time ago from the previous landowner. We are terminating that because it asked for a septic tank on our property. And we, of course, don't want to dig a septic tank onto a 4,000-year-old archaeological site. So the adjacent neighbor has agreed, and the town has agreed, and the county's agreed to enter into a new easement that would give the adjacent property owner the access. Because the current access is so close to the marsh buffer area, we decided to realign that road to be a little bit better suited for the site to get out of the marsh buffer. So there's plenty of space there from the road to the marsh edge while still allowing the adjacent property owner. As Missy mentioned, the parking area is immediately off of the drive aisle. So the drive aisle and the easement are one in the same, which I believe is a little bit unique. However, in order to create an access easement and then another entrance, again, we would be impacting the site. This is a relatively small site. It's only 6 acres. So to avoid cutting out more trees than is absolutely necessary, I think we're taking out 2, one of them which might be dead. So we're having as minimal impact as possible. The whole premise behind this project was to create a unique, low to no impact development for a passive park. So we are utilizing existing disturbed areas, existing trails, trying to preserve as much of the environment as possible, as well as not to disturb any of the 4,000-year-old archaeological artifacts. The entire site, aside from just the shell ring, the entire site was a site for Native American habitation. So we're trying to be incredibly respectful of the fact that there's more than just the shell ring itself on this piece of property has likely has artifacts within it. So so the buffer, that easement buffer, because the easement and the drive aisle are one and the same, as Missy mentioned, the buffer is on the marsh side of the easement, but on the other side, we have the parking areas that are within that buffer area. And unless there's any other questions, I guess that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Sturi, anything back to you as or any other person representing the applicant wanting to speak?
No, ma'am. I think we're ready to field questions from the board.
Okay, all right. Dr. Ponder, your name is first up on my list.
I think my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, any questions from you of the applicant?
Yes, I have one question, or maybe the easement leads to a piece of property. Is that developable back there with a residence?
Stephanie may be able to speak this a little better, but from what I understand, the property has a development agreement or some kind of restricted covenants on it that it cannot be developed. But I would like Stephanie or maybe Missy or someone who has been involved in that conversation. I think it's more Jamie than Missy, but
I'm happy to jump in. This is Jamie Lopko.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Lopko.
Both properties that are adjacent to this on that side were part of a PD2 overlay district. And so the density from those properties were transferred and they now are zoned conservation. So there is a very limited use of that property that would be allowed.
So that would eliminate any future electricity going back to those pieces of property.
I can't rule it out totally, but it is unlikely.
Is there any other way for electricity to get in there? Or is it locked by the marsh? And
it is landlocked. The only way to get access and or utilities to that property would be across the Ford Shell Ring property.
okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, questions from you of the applicant?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, questions from you?
Yeah, Stephanie, you mentioned about the potential for artifacts. What plans does the county have when you develop this site if you come across an archaeological artifact as you're developing the parking lot or the walking trails?
Well, as Nathan mentioned, the parking area is actually above grade, so we're not digging. If we do find any, when we dig post holes, then I will have that dirt can be bagged, and then we can have it stored until we can get an archaeologist on board to sift through it. So we could take that extra precaution. The trails themselves are already in place. We are not adding any new trails. The earthen trails are going to remain as they sit on the land, and then they'll just be mowed to open, mowed and trimmed up to open them up. There's a bunch of fallen trees at the moment.
Okay, just gravel possibly added on top of those trails for?
No, they're just going to be, they're just going to be earthen trails. We don't want to add anything to the top that could get washed away. So the parking area has these concrete, basically above ground headers and to keep the gravel in place, but we didn't want to do that around the entire trail.
So the possibility of ground disturbance is you've minimized that is where I'm going with that. The only way you're going to get into an area of disturbance would be for digging post holes.
Correct.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's all my questions for now.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walczak, questions from you?
Yes, I'd like to pursue the question about getting electric in for the charging station. The an electrical conduit can be installed underground through jacking or tunneling. You don't need to open excavate in order to put in electrical conduits. So I was wondering why that wouldn't be considered as an alternative to providing power to the charging station.
And to answer that, the whole intent of this project was to minimize disturbance as much as possible. So we really didn't want to, tried to just come in and dump gravel and move on, but obviously we had to go through all the town codes and meet all the mins that they have in there. But the EV charging station, in order to run that, it may require us removing additional trees to hit that bore. It just wasn't, it didn't seem feasible for us to impact that property without unearthing something. So to bore in there, I think you're gonna disturb trees and the natural vegetation. It can be done, yeah, probably, but it kind of goes against the intent of what we're trying to do here.
Well, I also agree with Madam Chair in that moving the handicap space away and putting the charging space closer would certainly minimize that. What is the distance from the roadway to that first space? And
the first handicap or the first non-handicap space is right around 65 feet away.
yeah, no, I mean, if we were to move the handicap to further in and put the charging station as the first station in first space.
That would be approximately 50 foot from the right of way.
50 feet.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, are there any trees directly on top of the roadway now where the roadway exists?
Yes, sir. We're removing, well, as Stephanie and everyone else said, we're shifting the road to a new location with a clearing. Right. It's requiring one tree removal to do that. So we found a pretty clear path through there. But to get to that first space, you'd have to go under a couple live oak trees.
Well, all right. I just think that something that could be looked into. Can you put the map up or the site plan to show that? Missy, perhaps you could put the site plan up so we can see it. Can you enlarge it at all a little bit?
That large enough yet, Mr. Walczak? Or?
Yeah, it cuts the bottom off where it connects to the. There we
right,
go.
Right.
So from the road to that first space, you say it's about 50 feet?
What was the question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
From the roadway, from the edge of the roadway to the first space where the handicap space is, that's about 50 feet?
So that's 70. I was saying 50 from the right of way line. You can see it's really hard to see on this site plan, but there's an underground electric line right along the property line.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I just think, as far as it's a large site when it comes to artifacts, and I understand the concern, but I also understand the concern of the need for the future. Not so much the environment as Dr. Ponder mentioned, but the future of the needs for charging stations, for example. And that's why it's in our LMO. And I think to eliminate it summarily is because there might be something that could get disturbed. I mean, when you make a bore, nothing's going to be disturbed. Everything gets pushed out of the way, so it's still going to be there. So I don't know. I think the argument is a little weak as far as trying to get rid of the charging station. And that's just my opinion on that. I think it's the wrong thing. I think we should try to get it in there.
Okay, understood.
Okay, that's all my comments.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, it's your turn. Questions of the applicant.
I have none at this time.
Okay. And it's back to the chair, and thank you, Mr. Walczak. You've got the engineering brain. I just have the maybe some of the ideas, but I'm still disturbed, and the applicant has not yet satisfied me that they even tried to find a way to put a electric vehicle charging station in this site. I heard we just wanted to dump some gravel, and believe me, I appreciate preserving archaeological and park sites, but I'm disturbed that there wasn't any effort to do something. So applicant, can you help me out any more about anything that you could have tried or did try or will try about an EV station?
We've basically been working on the directive that we don't want to do an EV charging station, and the boring is a possibility, but from what I understand, this project probably will not be moving forward without that, just because the whole intent is to not disturb this property and give a real natural feel to the property. So providing kind of everything we already have is the extent that we're willing to go, from what I understand, with this project.
Okay.
I'll make
Stephanie,
I'll make an additional comment to that too. This is a 6-acre passive park with 6 parking spaces. We do not anticipate a high level of traffic. The trail itself takes about 10 minutes to walk around, an additional 5 to read an interpretive sign. The county feels that the amount of time that somebody's spending on this particular property does not necessarily warrant the need for an electric vehicle station. You know, people are supposed to come to the property, walk the trail, read about the history, you know, learn something. It's not a shopping center. It's not some place where somebody's going to spend an hour or 2 of their time. So it just didn't seem like it was warranted for the expense and the degradation of the archaeological artifacts and the vegetation in order to install electricity for one electric vehicle station. It is a low impact, minimally used passive park. Additionally, I would hate for somebody to come to this park and occupy a space and plug in their car all day, occupying a space for other visitors who want to come in and out. This property is supposed to be for visitors to come in, enjoy what's there, make it publicly accessible, but not be a place for people to come and just park their car to charge it because they don't want to charge their car at home. So the fact that we're not having any utilities, any other utilities, it just didn't make sense to include it.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, please do.
How do you know how long people are going to spend, how much time people are going to spend at this park? What are the data points behind that?
The other properties that I have available to the public, even the largest properties that I have caught when I have surveyed vehicles coming in and out, the most time anybody spends in any one property that I have seen is about half hour to 40 minutes. And that's at a 170-acre property with a mile and a half of trail. So being that this is a 6-acre property with a 10-minute walk, it's very muggy in there. It's very buggy in there. Even along the river marsh there, it's also very muggy and buggy, except in like the best times of the year. So it's it's going to be a very, very cool historical place for people to come. We also have an agreement with the Archaeological Society of Hilton Head Island, who are going to, provide some help with trail maintenance, as well as text for the interpretation of the property. And so that's very nice that we're going to have a friends group with this particular property to keep an eye on things. But just the size and the parking available based off of the other passive parks that I have open, I just don't see people spending hours and hours of time there.
Let me ask a follow-up question. How many of those other parks that you're talking about have electric charging stations?
None of them.
And sorry, Dr. Ponder. Go ahead.
No, Madam Chair, please go ahead.
Mr. Christian, are you raising your hand or just stretching out?
I had a question for anyone associated with this, and I realize we should probably give this particular application a lot more scrutiny since it is an inside application. I mean, it's the town and the county that's making representations. In the LMO, and maybe Missy or Jamie can answer this for me, what level of charging station, if any, is demanded for an installation?
A level 1 or level 2 electric vehicle charging station is what our code requires.
Okay, and level 1 is what?
They're just based on the different charging types. It's the amount of, I think, voltage.
Missy, let me ask it in a different way. You could put in a charging station that's a trickle charger that would take about 12 hours to charge a vehicle, and that would meet the criteria. You could also put in a charging station where you use a credit card, and you would be able to charge for that. And both of those installations would meet the elements of the LMO for installation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, if you put in a trickle charger that, the person would have to spend, probably the entire day there to get a charge. And you could potentially put in a charging station where I know it would be a higher cost and it would be an ongoing maintenance cost, where the individual using the charging station would have to use their credit card or some other type of device where they would be paying for the privilege of charging their vehicle. Am I reading that correctly in the LMO?
The LMO doesn't designate how the access to the EV charging station happens.
Let me ask it in a different way. If you were given that as a alternative to meet the criteria of a charging station, would both of those be acceptable?
Well, it's a level 1 or a level 2 charging station is what our definition requires for an electric vehicle charging station.
Okay, you're not answering my question, Missy.
I don't think I'm understanding it, sir.
Okay. Can you put in a charging station that requires payment, and would it meet the requirement in the LMO?
Yes.
And would a trickle charger that charges at an extremely low rate and would take hours and hours to get any kind of a charge also be acceptable? That's a level 1, I believe.
As long as it's a level 1 or a level 2, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have just a further comment.
Yes, sir, Mr. Walczak, go ahead.
Is there any security plan for this park, such as remote TV cameras, any type of security plan at all? Or will it be? No plans for any security, so.
Not at this time. We're not planning to install cameras or any other ways to disturb the site.
Well, again, cameras can be mounted, or they're not mounted in the ground. Okay, I'm just pointing that out.
Any other board members have questions of the applicant? Yes, Dr. Ponder.
Actually, I have a question of the town. So
Okay.
can I ask that one now?
Sure, yeah, we have rebuttal time, but I think because this is in a way a joint project, I'd say go ahead.
What's the precedent that we might be setting here for avoiding putting in electric vehicle charging stations? You know, honestly, as an electric car driver, it matters to me. But more than that, I'm just, you know, it's not necessarily something that matters to what one might consider a critical mass of people on Hilton Head or in Beaufort County as yet. But that's likely to change, right? Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But I wonder whether leaving it out is one of those things where you say, well, nobody really cares about that right now. Let's just leave it out. And what kind of precedent are we setting perhaps for that kind of a thing? I mean, let me just say, I'm not making this decision as an electric car driver, right? I'm very attuned to the historical and archaeological issues that pertain to this case. And I'm very interested in those as well. And they matter a great deal to me. But I'm also wondering, is this something where people say, you know what, nobody really cares about that anyway. Yeah, let's just leave it out. But, you know, we don't have to deal with that right now. And what kind of precedent does that set? And what are we going to be facing a year from now, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now as a result? If anything, I'm asking if.
Ms. Lewick or other members of town staff?
Well, for
Can you
each
respond?
case, I'm sorry, for each case that the BZA hears, each case is unique and is based on the circumstances involving that case. So it doesn't set any particular precedents because all cases are considered when the facts are presented for that particular site or that case.
But in this particular case, we are privileging the historical importance of this piece of property over whatever is motivating the need for an electric charging vehicle, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, you could look at that based on what makes it so unique. The archaeological and historical significance is one of those. There are others as well, but yes, that is one of those.
Have there been other archaeological sites or historical sites that have been disturbed or, God forbid, destroyed as a result of development on this island? Likely.
I would imagine that the answer is yes, but I cannot speak to that directly.
All development on the island, when they submit for their land disturbance permit, are submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office. And if they are in a sensitive area, they will require a level 1 archaeological study before they're allowed to do work on the property. And that's based on what they find on their shovel tests. And sometimes they'll ask them to preserve a certain area as open space in perpetuity, and sometimes they'll find nothing. But the State Historic Preservation Office does chime in on those areas that have been determined to be significant.
Hopefully, but not promising. My last question. Do we know, I mean, and when I say no, I mean no from some sort of expert, right? Do we know that in order to comply, we would in fact be doing irreparable harm to the historical site? Do we know that?
I don't know that we've gone that far. We've had an archaeologist on site in past doing some studies on the property, but we did not have him specifically look at this.
Can anyone from Beaufort County answer that question? Do we know that we would be doing irreparable harm to the historical site in order to comply with any of the 3 things, but particularly that electric charging vehicle?
Yes, so I haven't had obviously every square inch of the property shovel tested. However, the property was purchased through the Rural and Critical Program because of the shell ring and the archaeological artifacts present at the time of purchase. Therefore, I am confident to say that doing even the minimal amount of digging that we're doing can harm what is present, which is why we would bag that soil and hold on to it. So, I mean, yes, the entire site is an archaeological site. Is the exact location of where we're putting fence posts going to destroy an archaeological artifact? I can't say that because I can't see, into the ground. But the likelihood of it is high enough for me to not be comfortable with doing any more than is absolutely necessary. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Mr. Walczak.
On security. If you're not providing security, why are you providing a gate?
We're providing a gate because all of the passive parks have gates that open at dawn, close at dusk in order to keep people out of there at night. It's also to respect the adjacent neighbors so that people aren't trespassing on the adjacent neighbors' property, since they also have marshside property, as well as the townhomes that are next door. They, I believe, have a security in their development, so we don't want to have people trespassing on the passive park property and then accessing townhomes through the woods, through the trail.
What is the extent of the fencing you're putting up? I didn't get a chance to study the site plan there.
It's just a split rail fence in the area of the vehicles where the drive aisle is in the parking spaces, so that the cars don't accidentally back up and fall down the slope into the marsh.
Looks like Mr. Walczak on the site plan, if we still have that available, as I see it, the split rail fence is just around that parking area.
Yes.
And the gate around the parking area and back.
Yes, ma'am. And that's to keep the vehicles from driving the trail, as it's basically just to make sure vehicles can't trespass around the property at will.
It's not extending out from the gate out on either parallel to Squire Pope, if you will. It's just around from the gate inside the parking area.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions from board members of the applicant before we go to staff rebuttal? I see none at this point. Ms. Lewick, any staff rebuttal?
The only rebuttal that I have to offer at this time is related to the question related to utilities being undergrounded. The code does require in 16.5-110E that utilities that are new or relocated electrical, cable, television, telephone, and gas utility lines, whether publicly or privately owned, shall be installed underground. So for the question of can the line be run overhead, our code doesn't currently allow that.
Absent a variance.
Yes, well, another variance.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. To allow the electric service. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Then since the town had rebuttal, any rebuttal back to that statement by the applicant? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to public comment. Ms. Haley, I understand that we do have public comment for this hearing. Is that still correct?
Madam Chair, we did have one citizen who signed up to speak, Mr. Thomas Barnwell. He signed up to give comments on the application. However, he has not joined the meeting at this time. We've been working behind the scenes to try to contact him, but we have not been successful.
Okay, all right. And I would assume you've been working on that since our meeting started? Is that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that's a little over an hour. Okay, thank you, ma'am. Any other comments or questions by board members before I incorporate all the evidence and close the public hearing? Oh, or someone speaking, but I'm not sure they were. Unless it's Ed McMahon calling me that I've won the sweepstakes, we'll move on. Right. Okay. I'm glad somebody got that one. So at this time, I will incorporate all the evidence, including the documents submitted by the staff and by the applicant before the hearing. Also, the reports, documents, and testimony provided during the hearing. I'll incorporate that into the record unless there's any objection. Hearing objection, that'll be incorporated, and I will now close the public hearing, and we will move on to board discussion. Mr. Christian, your name's first up in discussion if you want to have a discussion at this point.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very, very nice project, and it is in a very, very sensitive area. It is a passive solution. I believe both the town and the county have gone out of their way to try and minimize disturbance. I understand that there is concern about the charging station. I mean, I believe that's going to be a minimal deviation. And, you know, the future, I believe, is going to be electric vehicles. But like everything else on this earth, I think capitalism will take over. And just like gas stations, we will have charging stations where folks pull in and charge their vehicles, and they pay for the privilege like they pay for gasoline and road tax and everything else. So I will be supporting this particular variance.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Lost my spot. Mr. Walczak, discussion from you.
Yes, I mean, I have no problem with the project as it stands. I mean, I think everybody's tried to do the right thing here, but to ignore one of our relatively new requirements, I think, and to slough it off as well, it's and use the excuse that there might be something in the ground that is going to have an effect on the overall project or whatever. I don't quite get buy the whole logic of that. I think there are ways to get around this and still put in the station, as I said, by boring. That's not going to destroy any artifacts. It's simply a hole, and through the sand to get the wire in. So I in that sense, I'm not necessarily in favor of variance for that. The variance for the other issues that I have no problem with, but to eliminate the charging station, I'm not in favor of that.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, discussion from you.
Yes. As to the charging station, I am very much pro environment and electric cars, hybrid cars, etc. However, I do think the property is unique in the sense of extraordinary and exceptional conditions. I think a passive park that has no, as in zero, utilities, public or private, being installed to service the improvements, I think that makes this property very unique. And I do think a passive park of this size, with the number of parking spaces being installed, I think this is a justified variance to not require the installation of a charging station. It's almost a shame that a passive park is defined as non-residential development. We can't change that at the moment, but there is so little development occurring here. I think, again, I think that makes it a unique situation. So I am in support of the variance all the way around. That's my thoughts.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, discussion from you.
I find the couple things. I find the whole issue of the charging station somewhat troubling. I also find the county's discussion of it somewhat troubling. I thought it was flippant. And I don't think that they meant to present it in that way, but I'm just going to say I thought it was. I'm not going to, I mean, this is prioritizing one value over another. And I lean toward the value of the historical context and the archaeological context and preserving that for future generations. So I'm inclined to be supportive, but it does trouble me, and it troubles me with regard to precedent, that somehow this will be just cast off.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, discussion from you.
Oh, boy.
You still trying to decide what to say, Mr. Johnson? We couldn't hear you other than, oh, boy. Mr. Johnson, are you there? We can see your screen. I can see your screen lit up.
Mr. Johnson, you'll need to unmute on your end. Mr. Johnson, can you hear us now?
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
Now
Yes,
we can.
Okay, that was easy. So I think I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
I think it's a little incongruent. That's a word, probably not, but to have a 4,000-year-old
Oh, we lost you, Mr. Johnson.
to have the this shell ring with a charging station incorporated into the atmosphere. I think the town did a good job of evaluating the variance, and I'm for the variance.
Okay, thank you, sir. Anything else, Mr. Johnson?
No, that's it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, discussion from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also find actually I guess what I'll call the casual dismissal of the electric charging vehicle station a bit bothersome. Although it may very well disturb and harm the site, I don't think that anybody, to my knowledge, associated with this actually answered that question, and that's I do find that a bit bothersome. In terms of precedent, I'm a little less concerned about that, because if we're going to take as a precedent any sensitive archaeological site that's over 4,000 years old and has no other utilities, is a place where we would not disturb the land to install utilities. I think that that's something that most of us could probably get behind. I mean, not to tie a future board's hands, but I think that wouldn't be viewed by many people as unreasonable. I think that given the unmitigated public good of preserving this site and the fact that it is not being commercially developed, it's significant, and I think it's worth supporting. Notwithstanding the comments made, I still think it's worth supporting, and I would support that.
Thank you, sir. It's down to the chair. I agree with Dr. Ponder's description, although I agree with her that the applicant didn't mean for their responses about the EV station to be flippant. I found them the same, or as Mr. Finger has just discussed, a casual dismissal. I'm always bothered by local governments asking for variances, and being as this is in a way a joint county-town project, for the town to request variances from its own LMO code. I'm very concerned about that. And the way that it appears, I think Dr. Ponder was describing it as precedent setting. In a way it does, although we take projects individually. I've heard it said before that we've done this before, so why not do it again? And so I'm also concerned about that, especially with regard to a project in which the town is a partner, and to ask for variances from the LMO provisions. So I can just hear someone else coming in and saying, well, the town got this variance, why can't I? So that's the background against which I set my view at first of the town and county requesting variances at all. With regard to the buffering, because the drive aisle, if you will, the road which would service the parking area here and the easement are coincidental, and it's buffering one from the other, that's a question I'm not so bothered this time, although I usually am, by variances of buffering requirements. With regard to the gate, as long as the fire department is satisfied with the gate location, I can see other times where someone could pull in and have trouble backing out of this site, but perhaps 40 feet would allow them enough space to do that. It appears to address the stacking situation. So in this case, because of the particular circumstances, the gate doesn't bother as much. But as to the lack of effort to try to figure out how to put in an EV station, and because that is required by the LMO, and because our plan has as one of its pillars protecting the environment, I think that the lack of careful consideration of how to do it is a major problem. As we've discussed, there appear to be some ways to access that area of 50 plus feet with minimal or no disturbance. And because that was not even attempted, I will not support a variance with regard to the required EV station. Any other, and I'm also very supportive of protecting archaeological sites. I should have said that at the beginning. Any other discussion of board members at this point before I ask if anyone wants to make a motion? Any other discussion? Hearing none, is there someone who would like to make a motion on this request?
In the staff and the county report, notwithstanding that I don't believe that this sets a precedent that each variance considered on its own merits, that we approve this variance based on the fact that this is an historical site and we're trying to minimize the disturbance to the site in any degree.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? First of all, let me ask Ms. Haley, did you get that motion?
Madam Chair, I caught most of that. I do believe, Peter, in the beginning, you were muted. And I didn't know if that was part of your motion.
Being muted was not part of my motion.
So if I could recap, you're moving to approve the application based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law contained in the staff report?
Correct. And with the caveat that each variance is considered on its merits, and because of the unique nature of this particular site, being an archaeological site in its entirety, we're trying to minimize any disturbance to the surrounding area.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you for getting that clarified. Is there a second to that motion?
I'd like to second the motion.
That's Mr. Johnson, I heard.
Yes.
Any discussion on the motion by board members? The chair would add one comment. Would the maker and the second consider voting on the 3 variance requests separately?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Any discussion by any other board members? If not, Ms. Haley, will you call the roll on the motion, please, ma'am?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
Mr. Walczak, you are muted. Oh, we still didn't hear you, Mr. Walczak.
Against the motion?
thank you. Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
Grudgingly for the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
Against the motion for the reason of the EV station.
Motion carries 5-2.
Thank you. As indicated, the next step in the process is that the staff will prepare a notice of action, and that will be provided to the applicant after due signatures. The next item on our business is board business, and we have the proposed amendments to the rules of procedure. I want to thank Ms. Lewick for her due diligence and working with the board in this process. And I want to particularly thank Town Manager Mark Orlando for breaking the logjam so that we could have this before us today. And I want to especially thank him for that. So with that, Ms. Lewick, if you would present the proposed amendments to the rules of procedure.
Yes, thank you. First off, we apologize for the rules of procedure amendments in the packet, that they weren't able to be posted with the track changes live. Teresa Haley did send you the version that has the track changes on it, and we will make sure that the rules are in the double underline and strike through for the next meeting. But I just wanted to apologize for that. So we have been talking about this rules amendment for some time now, and here they are before you. I will just summarize some of the changes that are proposed in the amendment, and then we can go through and ask some questions. But we looked at the Municipal Association of South Carolina's guide rules for rules of procedure for a BCA. We also looked at other South Carolina municipalities as to what their rules looked like, as well as we looked at some of their agendas and minutes for their BCA meetings. We did find that most of the communities that we looked to do use the MASC rules as their guide and are mostly unedited from those guide rules. So in that, we found that most of, spilled my water.
Do you need a moment to mop up?
There wasn't much left, so I think it's fine. So most of, so the MASC rules are only 4 pages. Our rules document is quite lengthy at over 21 pages. We aren't recommending a wholesale downsizing of our rules. However, we do show in the amendment that we are proposing eliminating some of the references to Robert's rules. Throughout the document, there's a recommendation to change chairman and vice chairman to just chair and vice chair to be more gender neutral. And then in the references to South Carolina code sections, a number of those areas have been updated document wide. to make sure we're referencing the most current version of South Carolina code. And then we'll kind of dive into the actual amendments, which the first of which is how we make amendments. So there is a recommended change to how the BZA amends their rules. Right now it states that it's before the board in writing prior to a secondary meeting where they can, the board can approve the amendment. The language that's recommended for that change is identical to the MASC rules, which allows you to approve it the same meeting that you've seen it in writing, as long as the amendment is delivered to the board 7 days in advance. We are recommending a definition to board year, which follows the, this is the same as our fiscal year, so the July 1 to June 30th. So that term is defined. We have additional information on page 6 about education, and we adjust the deadline for turning in your required education to the board secretary every year. And then there are some changes to election of officers, and that is to be held at the beginning of the board year, and that would apply for the officers as well as when the secretary is appointed every year. On page 9, there is a change to allow virtual meetings. So that language has been added, and that is for the ability to hold a virtual meeting outside of an emergency order, which is what we're operating under now, or emergency ordinance rather. We looked at a public comment and making changes to allow public comment for appeals. However, upon that review, we have decided to keep our public comment rules as is. There is a new section for allowing an administration of an oath, and that would apply for persons that are providing evidence. And an administration of an oath can be done in advance. So all parties that would be under oath would be, that oath would be administered up front, maybe at the top of our agenda. There is some changes to the public comment section that allows, if we were holding a virtual meeting, that you would be able to, it speaks to making public comment remotely, as opposed to writing your name down and speaking into a podium. So it just has some language about remote public comment. And then kind of where the rules amendment started or stemmed from was our motion for reconsideration. And on pages 18 and 19 in the rules, you'll see a lot of changes to motion for reconsiderations to be called motions for rehearings. And largely the language that was identified for the amendment comes from the MASC guide, with one exception is that we struck the word reasonably from their recommendation. But we really had, when we had a number of cases in a particular neighborhood where 5 cases sought motion for reconsiderations, and then we reheard 5 cases. And that's kind of where some of the majority of this rules amendment stemmed from. And the reasoning in the current rules are that they had to file for a petition stating that they were misunderstood or misinterpreted. And so the new rules is, and the wording is that new evidence, which could not have been presented at the hearing, is kind of the new proposed language for a rehearing. So that is, in essence, a summary of the rules amendment. And it did go through a number of staff reviews as well as review by the town attorney. And so I can help answer any questions you might have about it. And Mr. Coltrane is also on the call as well.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Coltrane, anything you want to add before the board asks questions? See his name. Oh, there he is.
No, I'm here. No, I mean, I think Ms. Lewick covered it all. you've got the document in front of you with the, well, on my copy, it's blue line instead of red, but I think she covered everything. There was nothing in particular I had to add unless there are any questions of me about any of the changes that have been proposed.
Okay, thank you, sir. Let's go through the rotation of board members. Mr. Walczak, any questions from you about the proposed amendments?
No, only that maybe a minor correction I see, and unless I'm looking at not the latest version, but on page 5, Missy, I think it says July 1st through July 30th. That should be June 30th. No,
You're right.
it's just a typo, right?
You're right.
Okay. Well,
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, questions from you?
Just clarification. I mean, I think I understand what the words mean. Relative to the rehearing, the key point is that new evidence became available that could not have been presented during the original meeting, as opposed to the applicant just frankly failed to bring up a particular topic and then after the fact said, oh my goodness, I forgot to talk about this. Because that's kind of what happened in the one of those cases. But clearly the evidence had to be unavailable at the original hearing. Is that correct?
If that's directed to me, then the answer to your question is yes. I mean, the whole point of a rehearing is not to, take a mulligan, get a second swing at it. It's
Right.
because something changed that you
Okay.
didn't know before.
Mhm. Okay. All right. No, that's how I understand it. Good.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Loudermilk? Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, questions from you about the proposed amendments?
No, not at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, questions from you about the proposed amendments?
I don't have any questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, questions from you?
No questions. Thank you.
Mr. Christian, any questions from you?
Just a clarification. What was the reasoning behind changing the manner in which you could vote to change the rules to 7 days, seeing it 7 days, then having it presented at a meeting and then waiting for the next meeting before you vote on it? What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I guess we just had a relatively minor change that was noted. And under the current rules, that would be required to be in writing at the next meeting, and then you couldn't vote on it for a subsequent meeting. If we had what was proposed currently, I could make that amendment and it could be out in your packet in March, and you could vote for approval at that meeting in March. So it's one less meeting. It's still before the board in writing, but it just would be 1 month shorter.
I mean, any concern, regarding the public's ability to weigh in on any change or have board members digest the change? I mean, you're just getting one whack at it at one meeting.
It's the language that's in the MASC rules, and it's the same language for amendments that the other boards that we looked at used. So we find it to be adequate. If it seems like that's what the rest of the communities are doing, it seems like it will work just fine.
Okay, that's fair, Missy. Good job, though, by the way, on the entire document. Nicely done.
So that's down to the chair, and I agree. I appreciate all the hard work in this, and going through a lot of the issues that we had seen come before us. It dates back. I think Mr. Cottrell had some of those same questions back in 2019. So and glad to have this finally there. Just a couple of quick things from the chair, and I apologize. I try not to be nitpicky on these. On page 5 of the draft, again, that language where when the rules, how the rules are going to be amended, it says it may be amended at any regular meeting, and before we had regular and special meeting or special meeting. So I think a small change there in case we wanted to have them considered at a special meeting. So
Regular
yeah.
meeting or special meeting?
Yes, ma'am, that's on page 5
Okay.
of the copy I have. The next page, page 6, where we have to turn in our educational stuff by June 1. I just want to make sure that board members are comfortable with turning that in. We only have 3 months, March, April, and May before we'd have to turn in for this year. I understand that, and that I guess gives us another month if someone doesn't have enough time. But just any questions that anyone has about that timing? Okay, hearing none. Then the election, this is also on page 6. I think generally we've had elections during June to begin July 1. So the language says instead of at the end of each board year, it's at the beginning of each board year. And so the only thing there could be is a little bit of lag. Because we don't meet till towards the end of the month of July. If you have someone who's carrying over, then I guess they serve until their successor is elected. But if there's a request for a postponement or something like that, I just want us to recognize that there might be some lag time. And Mr. Coltrane, do you see any issues with us not electing folks until later in July?
Well, I think what we were thinking was that if you have new members coming on, those folks ought to be able to participate in the process of selecting the officers, or
Yes.
maybe want to stand for an office themselves. So
that makes sense. I was just wondering about any lag time because we don't meet, the very first of the month. So, but I guess
well, I mean, but you won't consider anything until you meet either. So.
Except for there might be a request for a postponement. Under the rules, the chair can approve a postponement up to 3 months, I think it is. Not that that's a major issue, but.
Well, but then the chair would remain the chair until
the new
meeting
election.
where you vote.
Okay, I thought so, but I just wanted to ask that question. So. Okay.
Ms. Bryson, if I may,
Yes.
that change was also made among the other boards to have the election of officers be consistent among those boards.
Sure.
And so it was a change that we're coordinating with the Planning Commission and the DRB to have the election of offices held at the same time.
Sure. I'll jump over to page 14, maybe where it first appears, the oath of office. I think that's great. That's what I'm familiar with. It does say any party who presents evidence. So, and public comment would not be evidence, but if a member of the public wants to present evidence, wouldn't they be sworn in as well? So maybe it should say instead of any party, any person, and perhaps that's a question from Mr. Coltrane.
I understand the reason it reads the way it does. If you wanted to change that to person, that would not be material to what you're requiring. And if it's a person that is in fact offering evidence, then yes, you would want that person to be sworn like any other person.
Okay, so we could change that from any party to any person, and that'd be fine. Okay.
Yes, again, the only thing would be that's, yeah, as you said, that would not apply to the public comment section. It would only apply to a person, making a presentation of evidence to the board.
Okay, thank you, sir. Then in the next section under public comment, I think this is just a small thing. If the meeting is virtually, then the chair would follow the same procedure minus the podium. I guess technically also there's no sign up sheet that they have to come and sign, but they have to sign up for comment ahead of time. So maybe just a slight tweaking of the language. there. I think I totally understood the intent there. And that appears a few times. And I think the last question I had was about the decision not to allow public to comment during an appeal. The way I read that says, upon the advice of the town attorney, staff is not recommending changing the public comment procedures for appeals cases. I'm familiar with public members, especially adjoining property owners, being allowed to become a part of the appeal process. And my question for Mr. Coltrane, is there a legal reason in South Carolina, either statutory or a case law, that says that you should not allow one who's not a party to an appeal to comment?
Well, in an appeal to the board, the sole question before the board is whether or not the officer from whom the appeal is lodged decided the matter correctly. And so I can't, there's, in my view, absolutely nothing that a third party to it can add that affects that one way or the other. I can also tell you that early on in the town's history, they used to allow that, and the board found itself swayed by things that neighbors said, and it led to a lot of problems. But I mean, the bigger issue is that given the limited scope of what's before the board, I do not see that a third party has anything to add to the question at all.
But there's no South Carolina law which prohibits that.
There's nothing that creates a bright line that says you can't do this. I will tell you that I believe it to be a very bad idea.
Okay, all right. Those are the notes and questions I had. Oh, I see Mr. Williams, Chet Williams, member of the public, who's an attorney, wants to comment. Mr. Williams, go ahead, please, sir. I see your hand. There we.
Good afternoon. How are you today, Madam Chair?
Oh, there he is. Okay, yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity. On your last question in Mr. Coltrane's comments, when you're hearing an appeal, you are sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity. That is, you're the judge, and you get to determine whether or not the right decision was made. Allowing public comment would be akin to a judge in a court hearing after he's heard all the testimony and all the evidence, looking out at the gallery. Okay, any of y'all have any questions out there? And that would be wholly and totally inappropriate. I mean, it's an adversarial quasi-judicial process. And like Mr. Coltrane said, third parties don't have any business dealing with that.
Okay, thank you, sir. I appreciate both comments. What I'm talking about is someone who might be an adjoining property owner who is actually a party in interest and might not have been included in the initial appeal. And maybe the better question is, could an adjacent property owner file an appeal of an official's decision?
If they're adversely affected by it, I think I defer to Mr. Coltrane, but in any appeal, I would imagine anyone has the opportunity to file a motion to intervene, and then the board gets to decide whether or not they are a proper party. I mean, there have been a number of appeals I filed over the years having to do with the issuance of permits, and in that context, the permit holder is always a necessary party, even though I don't represent the permit holder. And in that case, yes, there are outside party, but they are legitimately parties to the appeal. Then they're not just disinterested third party bystanders.
Yes, and I think we made some changes to the rules to clarify their right. I think it had to do with maybe filing documents, etc. So, okay, all right. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, go ahead.
With respect to the rules themselves, 4 pages of rules is one thing, 21 pages of rules is another thing, but I would admit to you that when it comes to the rules, the more detailed you can be, the better everybody is off. I mean, if you know what you're dealing, the better you know what you're dealing with, the better the end result is going to be.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other board members, questions, comments? Ms. Lewick, Mr. Coltrane, anything else to be said?
I have nothing else.
Okay, thank you, sir. With that, Ms. Lewick, do you have enough information to come back with a few tweaks to the rules and submit them to us for us to review at our next meeting and then act on, I guess, in April under the current process?
Yeah, I have one question on, was there agreement to change the oath statement from any party to any person? Is that what we wanted?
I think it was okay with me. I think Mr. Coltrane said okay.
Any person?
Mr. Coltrane, did I misspeak?
You did not. You can change it in that fashion. Just wanted to make sure that it's limited to people that are giving evidence before the board, not people who may be commenting as a member of the public.
Sure, sure. Anybody, any board member questions or objection to that change? Okay, thank you. Ms. Lewick, thank you very much. Mr. Coltrane, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to considering these revisions at our March board meeting and then hopefully adoption at the April board meeting. Okay. Mr. Coltrane, it looks like you're up next to talk about the status of appeals to circuit court.
There has been no change since the last meeting. We still have appeals pending from some of the owners in Sandcastles by the Sea. The group is still trying to get unanimity amongst all the owners along the town property. There is one individual who's raised an additional question, which I think has been answered, but I am still waiting to hear back from the lawyer representing the appealing parties, that being Mr. Mogul, on whether or not that did answer the question. I know he's been getting ready for and is actually trying a case this week, so he's been a little tied up. But I mean, there hasn't been any real change other than one person did raise a question that I think we answered, dealt with.
Thank you, sir. And anytime if there's a change in South Carolina law that we need to know about with regard to our procedure, I hope that you will let us know so we won't run astray.
If anything pops up, I'll let you know.
Thank you, sir. Next item is the waiver report from Ms. Lewick. As usual, we have the written report before us. If there's no objection, I'll only ask if there are any questions of Ms. Lewick. If not, we won't make her go through the full report. Any objection to only asking questions? With no objection, any questions of Ms. Lewick on that report? Thank you, Ms. Lewick. We appreciate your written report. And that leaves us to the status of LMO amendments. The board had requested some amendments and the staff had told us those were on hold until the strategic action plan was adopted by the town council with regard to our plan, the comprehensive plan. And now that has been done. And so we're back to asking for staff to give us an update on LMO amendments.
Sure, Nicole Dixon for the record. Right now, we are currently routing our LMO list through upper management for approval to move forward. And once that step is completed, we will send the list to our on-call code writing consultant to draft the LMO amendments. So we expect to move a set of LMO amendments through the adoption process sometime later this year.
Okay. Do we know at this point where the amendments recommended by the BZA are in that list of approval?
I do not. I know that it was on our lengthy list that we have. I'm not sure, if it made the cut for what's going to be moved forward this year, but it is on our list, and once we get that back from our upper management on the go ahead, I can update you once I hear back.
Okay. Can you ask that and report back to us at our March meeting to see if we made the cut?
I can do that, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions or comments from Ms. Dixon on the status of LMO amendments? Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Ms. Dixon. Any other business to come before the board today?
Madam Chair, just a question
Yes,
for
sir.
clarification. I know we readjusted those, our rules at this meeting. If we readjust them again at the next meeting, does that mean we have to wait another meeting in order to approve them?
That's correct. That's why I requested that we find a way to streamline this process. And as Ms. Lewick suggested, I think it was a very simple amendment. Something like changing an and to a thee, and we had to wait another month. We couldn't just go like, okay, we understand that and let's vote on it. So, yes,
It begs that if we have any suggestions for changes, that we make sure that they're engraved now, so we don't bring them up at our meeting in March and then have to wait another month and we prolong the agony.
Yes, sir. That's exactly, that's why I was a little nitpicky this time. So apologize for that, but I was trying to do that. Anybody else, any other business before the board before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Side
Mr.
move.
Christian, and a second by Mr. Walczak. I think just raise your hand, say I agree, and I will declare us adjourned at 4:36
I was
p.m.
going to move by unanimous consent.
Amen, Charlie.
Yeah, I think I heard that.
Aye.
All right. So thank you to you all for your patience at our lengthy meeting, and thank you to the staff, to the members of the public. And I see Councilmember Becker joined us, so we're glad to have you as well. And Mr. Williams, it was good to see you again. So, all right, thank you all. We are adjourned.